Good morning, students. Today we are going to start a new chapter, Be Wordsworth, written by V.S. Naipaul. By the end of the video, you will be able to know about the author V.S. Naipaul, narrate the summary of the chapter in your own words, and tell about the main themes of this chapter. So take out your workbook on echoes. Now let us first know about our author V.S. Naipaul. Vidyadhar Suraj Prasad Naipaul was born in 1932 in Trinidad. Naipaul's father was an English language journalist. In 1939, when Naipaul was 7 years old, his family moved to Port of Spain, where Naipaul enrolled in the government-run Queen's Royal College. Upon graduation, Naipaul won a government scholarship that allowed him to study in England at University College, Oxford. Naipaul worked briefly for BBC as a writer and editor for Caribbean Voices program. He then wrote several books. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2001. B. Wordsworth appears in Naipaul's Meagle Street, which is a collection of linked short stories with each story focusing on a single character. B. Wordsworth is a Calypsonian poet who befriends the narrator, a young, impressionable and inquisitive boy. The story is written with the aim of motivating the readers to appreciate poetry and beauty in the nature that surrounds us. I will first narrate the summary of the chapter. The story is told to the readers from the point of view of one character, that is, a young boy. It is he who is narrating one of his childhood experiences when he met our protagonist, B. Wordsworth. Beggars and rogues were usual visitors at Meagle Street where the narrator lived. The narrator, a young boy living in Meagle Street in Port of Spain, was approached by a well-dressed man who spoke impeccable English. The man asked the narrator if he could watch the bees buzzing about his trees. His trees means the trees in the house of the boy. The boy's mother reluctantly agreed. The man and the boy watched the bees together for about an hour. The man introduced himself as a poet named B. Wordsworth, where B stands for black. Nobody ever bought a single copy of his poetry, but it was his way of roaming around and observing things on the way. About a week later, the boy, while returning from school, met B. Wordsworth again at the corner of the Meagle Street. Wordsworth invited him to his house to eat mangoes from his yard. They soon became close friends. When the narrator reached home, he was thrashed by his mother. He angrily went back to Wordsworth's house. B. Wordsworth and the narrator went out for a walk. They lay on the grass and watched the sky and the stars. One day, when the narrator was in Wordsworth's house, he was told a story about a boy poet and a girl poet who were later married to each other. They continued going for walks together. They spent quality time with each other, had ice cream, and even shared their secret. Wordsworth told him about a poem he was writing that aimed to sing to all humanity one day. Gradually, the man's health began to deteriorate. On his dying day, he called the boy and told him that the story about two poets, the world's greatest poem, and all the talk about poetry were all lies. The boy ran home crying and came back a year later only to find out that B. Wordsworth's house had been pulled down and his trees had been cut. It was just as though B. Wordsworth had never existed. Now, we will read the summary from the workbook. But before that, note down meanings of some of the important words. Rogues are dishonest men. Impeccable means faultless. Buzzing means humming. Reluctantly means unwillingly. Thrashed means hit. Deteriorate means become worse. Now let us read. Beggars and rogues are usual visitors at Meagle Street, where the narrator lived. The narrator, a young boy living in Meagle Street in Port of Spain, was approached by a well-dressed man who spoke impeccable English. Impeccable means faultless. The narrator recalls how beggars and rogues called every day at the houses in Meagle Street. One afternoon, a strange caller came. At about 4, the man was neatly dressed and wore a hat, a white shirt, and black trousers. The man spoke impeccable English, which didn't sound natural. The man asked the narrator if he could watch the bees buzzing about his trees. The boy's mother reluctantly agreed. Reluctantly means unwillingly. The man and the boy watched the bees together for about an hour. So, this man, the strange caller, asked the narrator if he could watch the bees buzzing around the trees in his home, to which the boy's mother unwillingly agreed. So, the man and the boy watched the bees for about an hour. The man introduced himself as a poet named B. Wordsworth, where B stands for black. Nobody ever got a single copy of his poetry. It was his way of roaming around and observing things on the way. The man, on being asked for his name, told the boy that he was B. Wordsworth, where B stood for black. He told the boy that he was a poet and White Wordsworth was his brother. Remember, children, White Wordsworth here refers to William Wordsworth, a famous poet. He said that, like a great poet, he could watch a flower and cry. He then pulled out a piece of his poetry from his pocket to sell it to the boy for 4 cents. Before going, B. Wordsworth told the boy that he, the boy, was a good poet as he was. A week later, the boy, while returning from school, met B. Wordsworth again at the corner of Meagle Street. Wordsworth invited him to his house to eat mangoes from his yard. They soon became close friends. About a week later, while returning from his school one afternoon, the young narrator met B. Wordsworth at the corner of Meagle Street. Wordsworth invited boy to his house at Alberto Street to eat ripe, red and juicy mangoes. His yard was all green and there was not only a mango tree but also a coconut and a palm tree. When the narrator reached home, his mother thrashed him and he angrily went back to Wordsworth's house. After eating mangoes, when the boy reached home late, his mother scolded him for being so late. She beat him and in anger he ran out of the house, swearing never to come back again. After being beaten by his mother, the boy went to B. Wordsworth's house. Wordsworth took the crying boy out for a walk. B. Wordsworth and the narrator went out for a walk. They lay on the grass and watched sky and the stars. After being beaten by his mother, the boy went to B. Wordsworth's house. Wordsworth took the crying boy out for a walk. There they lay on the grass and looked up at the sky and the stars. Then a policeman came and asked them what they were doing, to which B. Wordsworth replied that he had been asking himself the same question from past 40 years. One day, when the narrator was in Wordsworth's house, he was told a story about a boy poet, a girl poet who were married to each other. The two became close friends. One day, the boy asked him the reason for keeping his yard so bushy. The poet then told him a story about two poets who got married. The girl poet died, and so did their unborn baby. Her sad husband thus did not touch anything in the garden, as she loved greenery all around. B. Wordsworth seemed to be growing older as he narrated the story. They continued going for long walks together. They spent quality time with each other, had ice cream, and even shared their secrets. Wordsworth told him about a poem he was writing that aimed to sing to all humanity one day. The boy and the poet continued going for long walks. They went to the botanical gardens and the rock gardens. The world became the most exciting place for the boy. It was when their bond had deepened that B. Wordsworth revealed to him his secret. He told him that he was writing the greatest poem in the world. He said that he had been working on it for more than 5 years and would finish it in 22 years. He told him that he wrote just one line a month as he wished to distill the experiences of a whole month into that single line of poetry. He believed his poem, once finished, would sing to all humanity. The man's health began to deteriorate. On his dying day, he called the boy and told him that the story about two poets, the world's greatest poem, and all the talk about poetry were all lies. In his last moments, B. Wordsworth acknowledged that the boy had poet's eye because he could see death. The man sensed his approaching death and hence revealed to the boy that the story and all his talks about poetry and the greatest poem in the world wasn't true. He asked the boy never to return to that place. The disheartened boy couldn't bear his friend's death and ran home crying. The boy ran home crying and came back a year later, only to find out that B. Wordsworth's house had been pulled down and his trees had been cut down. It was just as though B. Wordsworth had never existed. When the boy walked along Alberto Street a year later, he could not find any sign of the poet's house. The house had been pulled down, and in its place stood a big two-storied building. The trees had been cut down, and there was brick and concrete everywhere, as if B. Wordsworth had never existed. Now, students, we are going to discuss themes, the main themes of the chapter B. Wordsworth. So now, open your workbook at page number 179. The first theme that we are going to read about is identity. The second is failure and disillusionment. The third is love of nature. So first of all, we are going to read the theme of identity. So note down the important meanings. Post-colonial means after the rule of the Britishers. Misplaced means lost. Identity means what a person is. Protagonist means main character. Imitate means copy. Impeccable means faultless. Native means an inhabitant. Dialect means local language. Morning glory is name of a flower. Aspired means desired. Associate means link. Revealed means disclosed. Humanity means mankind. Pretended means assumed. And illusions means false idea or belief. Now let us read our first theme. But before I start with this theme, let me tell you what it is. Britishers had made colonies in almost every part of the world, and we all know they had ruled over India too. Now, wherever they went, they introduced their language, that is English, and their literature in education system of the countries. And people like B. Wordsworth lost their identity following what the colonizers taught them. Now let us read from the workbook. Identity. B. Wordsworth, way of dressing and speaking. B. Wordsworth, being a part of a post-colonial novel Meagle Street, focuses on the issue of identity. Post-colonial means after the rule of the Britishers ended. But remember, they had already left a great impact on the mindset of the people by then. The protagonist of the story, B. Wordsworth, seemed to have a misplaced identity. Misplaced means lost. Being a colonized Trinidad man, he dressed like his colonizers. So colonizers here means the Britishers. He wore a hat, a shirt, and a pair of black trousers. He tried to imitate the English not only in his way of dressing but also in the way he spoke. He spoke impeccable English, but it didn't sound natural. He seemed to have rejected his native dialect. B. Wordsworth then failed to identify himself either with his native people or with his colonizers. So the man, B. Wordsworth, was so impressed by the dressing sense of English that he chose to cling to the laid down parameters of British dress code. Even his way of speaking English impresses the boy so much that he thought the man was highly qualified and refined. Now the next point is his name. His name B. Wordsworth and his claim that White Wordsworth was his brother seems to be a failed effort on his part to identify himself with famous romantic poet William Wordsworth. He aspired means wished, to associate, which means link, himself with William Wordsworth by the fact that he could watch a small flower like the morning glory and cry. He aimed to write the greatest poem in the world, which would sing to all humanity. Humanity means mankind. But in reality, nobody had ever bought a single copy of his poetry. The White Wordsworth that the man spoke of is William Wordsworth, the famous romantic poet known for his love for nature. The imitation of colonizers' identity made B. Wordsworth establish an instant correlation with the literary tradition of English literature. His choice of William Wordsworth as his mentor poet underlines that he has lost his original identity to the West. B. Wordsworth's death. It was during his last moments that B. Wordsworth revealed that his attempts to identify himself as a great poet were all a lie. The story about the boy poet and the girl poet, all the talks about poetry, wasn't true at all. He pretended to be working on the greatest poem in the world, but he did not produce any result. On his deathbed, he set himself free from all the illusions and died. It was just as though B. Wordsworth had never existed. These colonial experiences made people feel that they were living in two worlds. They not only had a zealous wish to keep up their culture and tradition alive, but they also wanted to become modern like the English people. But on his deathbed, B. Wordsworth set himself free from all these illusions. And he told the boy also that whatever he talked about, the boy poet, the girl poet, their unborn child, the death of the girl poet, and other things about his greatest poem were all untrue. They were all false. Now let us discuss the next theme. Our next theme is failure and disillusionment. But before we start it, note down meanings of some words. Solitary means existing alone. Intellectually means using brain power. Superficial means shallow or baseless. Alienated means unloved or left alone. Curious means eager. Curious means eager. Distilled means make a sense of something. Materialistic, excessively concerned with material possessions. Marvels are miracles. Disillusion means disappointed or dissatisfied. Now let us read our theme. Failure and disillusionment is another important theme of the story. B. Wordsworth was the society's solitary creative voice. On superficial level, being creative and intellectually curious alienated him from his neighbors. So here solitary means lonely. Alienated means he was left alone. He was set aside by his neighbors, who were leading materialistic life. B. Wordsworth, as a lover of nature, observed even the smallest marvels, that is, miracles, like the path of a pin in water, and from these observations he distilled lessons. Distilled means he made out. B. Wordsworth's character failed because he claimed to be the greatest poet in the world, but he never completed a poem. The one poem on the mothers that he had completed didn't get him any buyers. The other poem that was aimed to speak to all humanity would take 22 years to complete, as he distills the experiences of whole month in a single line. The man was thus disillusioned. He did recognize the limits of his capability, which finally failed him to such an extent that a year later, after his death, it appeared as if B. Wordsworth had never existed. B. Wordsworth, who was different from the other native people of Trinidad and had a creative outlook, was shunned by people there. The poet in him alienated him from the rest of the world. So the last words of the man to the boy, that everything he said about the greatest poem, the boy poet and the girl poet, etc., were false, disclose that he lived in illusion, but on his deathbed he set himself free from them. Now let us do our next theme, but before that, note down the meanings. Gru palm tree is a type of a tree. Concrete means made of bricks and cement. Yard is an area of land adjacent to a building. Wild means uninhabited. So our next theme is love of nature. Love of nature in the story is reflected both by B. Wordsworth and the young boy. B. Wordsworth liked to watch a variety of objects in nature, like the bees on the gru palm tree or a small flower. He was fond of the natural surroundings as opposed to concrete city life. He liked to lie on the grass and watch stars in the sky. He wanted the boy to share his love of nature with him. He took him out for a walk, and the boy, while watching stars above him, felt big and great the way he had never felt before. B. Wordsworth was so much in love with natural beauty that he kept his yard all green and bushy. Like his brother White Wordsworth, he was romantic at heart. In his yard there was a big mango tree, a coconut tree, and a plum tree. The place looked wild, as though it wasn't in the city at all. From his house one couldn't see all the big concrete houses in the street. B. Wordsworth was so much a part of nature that a year later, after his death, when the narrator walked along Alberto Street, the presence of brick and concrete everywhere marked his absence. His trees, bushes were no longer there. It was just as though B. Wordsworth had never existed. This story, B. Wordsworth, vividly reflects the theme of love for nature. B. Wordsworth's fondness for bees, flowers, and trees, and the boy's feeling of becoming big and great in the lap of nature clearly reflects it. B. Wordsworth took the boy for a walk when he was upset. Moreover, his own house too had many trees and bushes. So these both instances clearly reflect the healing power of nature that could heal the pain, anger, anguish, and tears of a person. Okay, students. Now I hope you will be able to tell about the poet V.S. Naipaul. You will be able to narrate the summary of the chapter B. Wordsworth. You have already understood the 3 themes that we have discussed in this video. Read them from your workbook and watch this video again and again for better understanding. Thank you.